For years, Sergeant Hollis and his men twisted the law into a weapon. They patrolled not to protect, but to dominate, mocking, humiliating, and driving out anyone who didn't fit their vision of who belonged. But when they mocked and brutalized a fat black homeowner in front of his wife and daughter, they chose the wrong man. What they could not see, what they never imagined, was that Marcus Reed was a Delta Force commander, forged in combat and unbreakable in spirit. The sneers died on their lips as realization struck. They had provoked a soldier trained for war, and war was exactly what they were about to get. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Marcus Reed pulled his SUV into the curved driveway of their new two-story colonial home, the late afternoon sun warming the red brick facade. The car's trunk was packed with grocery bags from their first big shopping trip as homeowners. He couldn't help but smile as he watched Naomi practically bounce in the back seat, her excitement infectious. "Can I really paint my room any color I want?" Naomi asked for the third time that day, her dark eyes sparkling with possibility. Angela turned in the passenger seat, her warm smile lighting up her face. "Within reason, baby. Maybe not neon green." "Oh, Mom," Naomi pouted, but couldn't hide her grin. Marcus stepped out of the car, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the manicured lawn. The air felt different here in the suburbs, cleaner, quieter than their old apartment. But something else hung in that air too, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Years of military training had taught him to trust those instincts. Across the street, a white couple working in their garden suddenly became very interested in their flower beds. An elderly man walking his dog crossed to the other side of the street, his pace quickening. Two women pushing strollers whispered to each other, their eyes darting toward the reeds before hurrying along. Angela noticed too. She always did. "Marcus," she said softly, reaching for his hand. "We belong here," he said firmly, squeezing her fingers. He pulled the deed from his jacket pocket, the paper still crisp and official. "This is our home now." They began unloading groceries, plastic bags rustling as they made trips between the car and the front door. Naomi insisted on carrying the lighter bags, determined to help. "Just think," Angela said, balancing 3 bags on one arm while fumbling with her keys. "No more sharing a bedroom with all your stuffed animals, baby girl." "I'm going to make a reading corner," Naomi declared. "With pillows and fairy lights and everything?" Marcus watched his daughter's enthusiasm, his chest tight with pride and determination. This was why he'd worked so hard, saved every penny, fought through all the extra paperwork, and lost applications. His family deserved this, a home of their own, a safe neighborhood, good schools. The deed felt heavy in his pocket. He'd read it a dozen times, checking and double-checking every detail. The property was theirs, fair and square, no matter how many neighbors pretended not to see them. "Did you see Mrs. Thompson next door?" Angela whispered as they unpacked groceries in the kitchen. "She was watering her plants when we pulled up. The second she saw us, she went inside and closed all her curtains." Marcus placed a protective hand on her shoulder. "Give them time. They'll get used to us." "Dad!" Naomi called from the living room. "Can we get a swing set for the backyard? Jenny at school has one with a slide and everything." "We'll see, Princess," he answered, watching her explore the empty room, testing which floorboards creaked. Her joy made all the suspicious stares worth it. Angela lined up cereal boxes in the pantry, her movements precise but tense. "I just want her to be happy here, to feel welcome." "She will be," Marcus assured her, though his tactical mind was already mapping escape routes, security weak points, potential threats. Old habits died hard. "We all will be." They continued unpacking, their voices echoing in the empty rooms. Naomi ran up and down the stairs, claiming different spots for her toys and books. The house slowly began to feel more like theirs with each item they put away. "Remember our first apartment?" Angela asked, wrapping her arms around Marcus's waist. "That tiny studio with the leaky ceiling?" He chuckled, the sound rumbling in his chest. "And the neighbor who played accordion at 3 a.m.? Look how far we've come," she said softly. Marcus pulled out the deed again, running his fingers over their names printed in black ink. Angela Reed. Marcus Reed. Property owners. Homeowners. The American dream made real through sheer determination and years of sacrifice. "I'm going to check out my room again," Naomi announced, thundering up the stairs. "I need to measure where my bookshelf will go." "Don't run in the house," Angela called after her, but she was smiling. Marcus watched his daughter disappear upstairs, then turned to his wife. "Thank you for believing in this." "In me. Always," Angela replied, reaching up to touch his cheek. "This is our home now. No one can take that from us." They stood together in their new kitchen, surrounded by half-unpacked groceries and endless possibility. The late afternoon light streamed through the windows, painting golden rectangles on the hardwood floors. For a moment, everything felt perfect. Then red and blue lights suddenly flooded the kitchen, harsh and jarring against the warm sunlight. The sound of tires screeching to a halt on their driveway shattered the peace. Multiple car doors slammed in quick succession. Angela's hand found Marcus's arm, gripping tight. "Marcus?" His body tensed, combat instincts kicking in as he assessed the situation. Through the windows, he could see at least 3 police cruisers, their lights painting the neighborhood in alternating crimson and azure. Officers were emerging, hands already on their weapons. "Naomi!" Angela called out, her voice tight with fear. "Come down here, baby, right now." Their daughter appeared at the top of the stairs, eyes wide. "Mom? Dad? What's happening?" The flashing lights kept pulsing, turning their dream home into a nightmare disco of red and blue. Marcus could see neighbors emerging from their houses, watching the scene unfold with a mixture of curiosity and something that looked disturbingly like satisfaction. Through the window, Marcus watched as 6 officers fanned out across his front yard, their hands hovering near their weapons. Leading them was Sergeant David Hollis, a tall man with cold eyes and graying temples. His posture radiated contempt as he surveyed the house. "Get out here," Hollis's voice boomed across the yard. "All of you, outside, now!" Marcus stepped onto his front porch, Angela close behind him with Naomi clutching her hand. The flashing lights painted their faces in alternating shadows of red and blue. "This is private property," Marcus said firmly, his voice carrying across the yard. "I'm the homeowner." Officer Carter let out a harsh laugh. "Homeowner? Look at this guy, Sarge. Built like a house himself." "More like a warehouse," Briggs added with a snicker, patting his own lean stomach. Hollis's lip curled as he looked Marcus up and down. "This is a restricted neighborhood, boy. Your kind doesn't belong here." The word boy hit Marcus like a physical blow, but he kept his composure. Angela's fingers dug into his arm as neighbors gathered on their lawns to watch. "I have the deed right here," Marcus said, pulling out the document. "We bought this house legally. Everything's in order." Hollis snatched the paper, barely glancing at it, before crumpling it in his fist. This is obviously fake. Probably printed it at the library." "That's ridiculous!" Angela spoke up, her teacher's voice sharp with indignation. "We have every right to be here." Carter stepped closer, leering at Angela. "Pretty uppity for a squatter, aren't you, sweetheart?" "Leave my mom alone!" Naomi shouted, though her voice trembled. Briggs made a show of looking around the yard, probably casing the place for their whole crew. "These people travel in packs, you know." "That's enough," Marcus growled, his military training warring with his need to stay calm. "My family lives here now. Check the records if you don't believe me. Oh, we'll check something all right, Hollis sneered. Carter, Briggs, secure the suspects. They're trespassing on private property. Everything happened at once. Carter grabbed Angela, slamming her face down against the hood of the nearest police car. Briggs shoved Naomi roughly aside, sending her stumbling onto the grass. Two other officers rushed Marcus, driving their knees into his back as they forced him to the ground. The concrete scraped Marcus's cheek as they ground his face into the driveway. One officer dug his knee harder into Marcus's spine, while another twisted his arm behind his back with unnecessary force. "Stop resisting!" Carter shouted, though Marcus hadn't moved. "Please!" Angela cried out, as they cuffed her hands behind her back. "Our daughter is watching!" Hollis walked over to where Marcus lay pinned. "Not so big now, are you? Should have known your place." Something inside Marcus snapped. Years of Delta Force training took over. He exploded upward, throwing off the officers like rag dolls. His elbow caught one in the throat, sending him stumbling backward, gasping for air. The other reached for his taser, but Marcus was faster. He grabbed the officer's wrist, twisting until bones cracked. Briggs charged forward, baton raised. Marcus caught the swing easily, yanking the weapon away and using Briggs's own momentum to slam him face first into the police cruiser. The impact left a spiderweb of cracks in the windshield. "Gun!" Carter screamed, scrambling backward while drawing his weapon. "He's got Briggs's baton!" Two more officers raised their firearms, forming a semicircle around Marcus. Hollis pulled his own weapon, aiming it at Marcus's chest. "Give me a reason," Hollis snarled. "Just one reason." Angela had managed to slip free in the chaos. She ran to Naomi, wrapping her arms around their daughter and pulling her close. "Marcus, please, think of Naomi." Blood trickled down Marcus's face from where they'd ground it into the concrete. His chest heaved as he stood in a fighting stance, surrounded by drawn weapons. The taste of copper filled his mouth, mixing with the bitter rage that threatened to overwhelm him. "You want to shoot me?" Marcus's voice was deadly calm. "In front of my wife and daughter? In front of all these witnesses?" Neighbors had their phones out now, recording everything. Hollis noticed too, his eyes darting between the gathering crowd and Marcus. "Drop the baton," Hollis ordered, tightening his grip on his gun. "On your knees, hands behind your head." Marcus's military training screamed at him to press the advantage. He could disarm at least two of them before they got a shot off. But Angela's terrified face and Naomi's quiet sobs pulled him back from the edge. "This isn't over," Marcus said, blood dripping from his chin onto his shirt. "Oh, it's just beginning," Hollis promised, his voice thick with menace. The standoff stretched taut as a tripwire, neither side willing to back down. Red and blue lights continued to flash, casting wild shadows across the scene of violence that had erupted on what should have been a peaceful suburban street. The tension exploded into chaos as Carter lunged forward, his face twisted with rage. His fist caught Angela across the jaw with a sickening crack, sending her sprawling against the wooden porch steps. Blood trickled from her split lip as she crumpled to the ground. "Mom!" Naomi's scream pierced the night air. Another officer grabbed for her, meaty fingers closing around her small arm. Marcus's world went red. The careful restraint he'd been clinging to shattered like glass. His body moved with fluid precision, muscle memory from countless missions taking over. Carter barely had time to register the blur of movement before Marcus's fist connected with his sternum, driving the air from his lungs. The screen door splintered as Marcus drove Carter through it, head first. The metal frame twisted and bent, and Carter's body went limp as he crashed onto the porch in a shower of torn mesh and broken wood. Briggs fumbled for his holster, eyes wide with panic. Marcus closed the distance in 2 steps, catching the officer's gun hand and wrenching it backward. The sharp crack of breaking bone cut through the chaos, followed by Briggs's high-pitched scream. His gun clattered uselessly to the ground as he clutched his mangled arm. Jesus Christ! Another officer charged forward, nightstick raised. Marcus caught the swing easily, using the man's momentum to drive him face first into the porch railing. Wood splintered on impact, and the officer slumped to the ground, blood streaming from his broken nose. They kept coming, and Marcus kept moving. His size belied his speed, each movement precise, each strike devastating. An elbow to a throat here, a knee to a kidney there. Bodies dropped around him like autumn leaves, the yard filling with groaning officers clutching various broken parts. The laughter and racist taunts had died away, replaced by grunts of pain and shocked whispers. The neighbors who had gathered to watch stood in stunned silence, phones still recording as the man they'd dismissed as just another target systematically dismantled an entire police squad. "How?" Carter wheezed from his position on the porch, blood streaming from his nose and split lip. "You're just a fat—" He coughed, spitting red onto the wooden boards. "How can you move like that?" Marcus stood in the center of the carnage, chest heaving. His knuckles were split and bleeding, his shirt torn at the shoulder. But his eyes remained sharp, focused, scanning for the next threat, even as the remaining officers backed away. "This is impossible," Briggs moaned, cradling his broken arm. "Nobody fights like this." Nobody! Hollis had retreated to his cruiser, gun still drawn but hands visibly shaking. The contempt in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Fear. Marcus reached slowly into his back pocket, movements deliberate. Several officers flinched, expecting another attack. Instead, he pulled out his wallet and removed a worn ID card. "You wanted to know who I am?" His voice carried across the suddenly quiet yard. He held up the ID, letting the porch light catch the distinctive insignia. Commander Marcus Reed, Delta Force, retired. The silence that followed was deafening. One of the officers, who had been reaching for his taser, let his hand drop limply to his side. Another took an involuntary step backward. "Delta!" Carter's voice cracked as he tried to push himself up from the splintered remains of the screen door. "You're—" "Impossible," Hollis whispered, but the tremor in his voice betrayed his cracking confidence. The man they'd dismissed as an easy target, had mocked for his size, was one of the most highly trained soldiers in the world. Marcus moved to Angela's side, helping her gently to her feet. She leaned against him, touching her split lip with trembling fingers. Naomi ran to them both, wrapping her arms around their waists and burying her face against Marcus's shirt. "Still want to question my papers?" Marcus's voice was deadly calm as he stared down Hollis. "Still want to tell me I don't belong here?" The officers, who could still stand, had backed away to their cruisers, leaving their injured colleagues scattered across the yard and porch. The neighbors continued filming, their phones capturing every moment of the shocking revelation. Carter tried to crawl toward his dropped weapon, but his arms gave out, and he collapsed back onto the porch boards with a wet cough. Briggs had curled into a fetal position, whimpering softly as he clutched his shattered arm. Hollis's voice faltered as he looked at his broken men, then back at Marcus. The Delta Force ID still gleamed in the artificial light, a damning testament to their catastrophic mistake. "This isn't what?" Marcus's quiet question carried more menace than any shout. "Isn't going according to plan? Isn't the outcome you expected when you decided to terrorize my family?" Angela pressed closer to his side, her hand finding his. Blood from her split lip had stained the collar of her shirt, but her eyes burned with the same defiant fire as her husband's. Naomi looked up at them both, her young face tear-streaked but determined. The porch light cast harsh shadows across the scene, broken bodies, splintered wood, and at the center, a family standing unbroken, The Delta Force insignia catching the light like a promise of retribution to come. The morning sun cast long shadows across the driveway as Marcus loaded empty paint cans into his truck. The front porch still bore the scars of last night's violence: splintered wood, torn screen mesh, and dark stains that wouldn't wash away easily. "I'll be back in an hour," he called to Angela, who stood in the doorway with an ice pack pressed against her swollen lip. "Just need to grab supplies to fix this mess." Naomi peeked around her mother's hip. "Can I come?" Marcus shook his head gently. "Not this time, baby. Stay with your mama." He didn't say what they all knew. It wasn't safe for her to be out alone with him right now. The local hardware store was mostly empty when Marcus arrived. He could feel the cashier's eyes following him as he loaded his cart with wood planks, screws, and a new screen door. The morning news played on a small TV behind the counter, and Marcus caught glimpses of his own face on the screen. "That'll be $247, the cashier said, voice tight with barely concealed hostility. His name tag read, Dave. Marcus handed over his credit card. Dave held it like it might bite him. "Saw you on the news," Dave muttered, swiping the card with deliberate slowness. "They say you put 6 officers in the hospital." "That's not what happened." Marcus kept his voice level, though his jaw clenched. "Yeah? Video shows different." Dave thrust the receipt at him. "We don't need your kind of trouble around here." Marcus wanted to argue, to explain, but he'd learned long ago that some minds couldn't be changed. He loaded the supplies into his truck in silence, his back straight, despite the weight of suspicious stares from other customers. The sight of 3 squad cars parked in front of his house made his stomach drop. Angela stood on the porch, arms crossed, while 2 uniformed officers Marcus didn't recognize from last night blocked her path to the door. "Marcus Reed?" A man in a suit stepped forward, holding up a badge. "Detective Wilson, Internal Affairs. We have some papers for you." Marcus parked carefully, his movements measured as he stepped out of the truck. "What kind of papers?" "You're being charged with 6 counts of felony assault on law enforcement officers, resisting arrest, and criminal trespassing." Wilson's tone was clipped, professional. "We have witness statements confirming you attacked officers without provocation during a routine property check." "Without provocation?" Angela's voice cracked with disbelief. "They attacked us! We have proof! The neighbors were filming everything!" Wilson's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No videos have been submitted to evidence. In fact, several witnesses state you were combative from the start, refusing lawful commands and initiating violence." Marcus's hands curled into fists as he read through the charges. His military record, his decorated service. None of it mattered. They'd twisted everything, painting him as a dangerous criminal who had to be stopped. "The news is saying awful things, Dad." Naomi appeared in the doorway, her phone clutched in her hand. "They're calling you a thug. Jenny at school said her mom told her you tried to kill those officers." Marcus's heart clenched at the hurt in his daughter's voice. He opened his phone's browser, and there it was. "Violent ex-military member assaults police during routine stop." The article described him as unstable and dangerous, questioning how someone with his violent tendencies had been allowed to serve in Delta Force. "This is insane," Angela said, moving to stand beside him. "We had at least 10 different neighbors recording. There's no way all that footage just disappeared." "I suggest you get a good lawyer," Wilson said, already turning away. "Your arraignment is scheduled for next week. Until then, stay in the county." He paused, looking back with cold eyes. "And pray none of those officers die from their injuries." The squad cars pulled away, leaving Marcus standing in his driveway, holding papers that could destroy everything he'd built. The hardware store supplies sat untouched in his truck, the broken porch now the least of his problems. Throughout the day, more news stories appeared. Each one painted a darker picture, suggesting his military service had left him mentally unstable, questioning his right to own the property, even hinting at drug use based on anonymous sources. Naomi came home from school in tears. "Nobody will talk to me," she sobbed into Angela's shoulder. "They're saying we're criminals, that we stole this house." Marcus watched his family hurting and felt helpless for the first time since leaving the service. He could handle physical threats, but this was different. They were using the system itself against him, twisting the truth until his very presence became a crime. The phone rang just after midnight. Marcus answered, expecting his lawyer. "Leave the house." The voice was electronically distorted, emotionless. "You've got 24 hours. After that, we'll bury you so deep in charges your grandkids will be paying legal fees. And that's if you survive what's coming." "Who is this?" Marcus demanded, but the line was already dead. He stood in the dark kitchen, phone still in hand, listening to his family's quiet breathing from upstairs. The house he'd bought to give them safety had become a battlefield. But this wasn't a fight he could win with fists or tactical training. The charges in his hand felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever carried. 6 felony counts, each one capable of sending him away for years. And somewhere out there, someone was orchestrating all of it, erasing evidence and twisting truth into poison. Angela paced the kitchen, her phone pressed to her ear. "Yes, tomorrow at 10 works perfectly. Thank you, Ms. James." She ended the call and turned to Marcus, who sat at the table reviewing the stack of charges. "I've made an appointment with Clarissa James. She's a civil rights lawyer who's won cases like this before." Marcus didn't look up. "We can't afford a fancy lawyer, Angela. She's taking our case pro bono." Angela pulled out a chair and sat beside him. "Marcus, look at me. We need help. These charges, they're trying to bury you." The next morning, they drove downtown to a modest office building. The elevator creaked as it carried them to the 3rd floor, where a simple door read, "James Legal Services, Civil Rights Division." Clarissa James stood as they entered, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. She was younger than Marcus expected, but carried herself with the confidence of someone who had fought many battles in the courtroom. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed," she gestured to the chairs across from her desk. "I've reviewed the preliminary charges, but before we discuss those, there's something you need to know about your property." She pulled out an old yellowed newspaper from her desk drawer. The date read June 15th, 1963. "Your home sits on what used to be the New Hope Baptist Church grounds. It was burned down during what the papers called civil unrest, but what was actually a calculated racist attack." Marcus leaned forward, studying the grainy black-and-white photo of a church engulfed in flames. "I've never heard about this." "Because they buried it." Clarissa's voice hardened. 17 people died that night. The church had been organizing voter registration drives. Local officials, including law enforcement, were involved in the attack. Afterward, they seized the land through what they called urban renewal. Angela's hand found Marcus's. "And now? Now, that land is worth millions due to development plans. Plans that certain people have invested heavily in." Clarissa spread out more documents. "The same families that helped cover up the massacre still hold power in this city. The current police captain? His grandfather was sheriff during the burning." Marcus felt something cold settle in his gut. "The charges aren't about last night at all, are they?" "No." Clarissa shook her head. "They never intended to protect the law. You're a threat because you own land that holds their secrets. Land soaked in blood they'd rather forget." She pulled out more recent documents. "Look at these property records. Every time a black family has tried to buy in that area, they've faced harassment, false charges, mysterious accidents. You're just the latest target." "But we have the deed," Angela protested. "We bought it legally." "Through a blind listing," Clarissa explained. They didn't know who was buying until you showed up. Now they're scrambling to force you out before anyone starts asking questions about the land's history. Marcus stood, pacing the small office. So what do? We fight. Clarissa's eyes blazed. I've been building a case about this land for years, but previous families were scared away before we could get to court. With your military background and clean record, you're their worst nightmare, someone who won't be easily intimidated. They're trying to paint me as violent, unstable. Marcus gestured to the charge papers. Exactly. They're following their old playbook. Discredit, criminalize, destroy. Clarissa leaned forward. But here's what they don't know. I found relatives of the church victims. They're willing to testify about what really happened. We can expose everything. Angela squeezed Marcus's hand. It's not just about our home anymore, is it? No, Clarissa confirmed. It's about justice that's 6 decades overdue. That evening, Marcus stood in his front yard as sunset painted the sky blood red. He stared at the ground beneath his boots, thinking of the church that once stood there, of the people who died fighting for their rights. The soil seemed to whisper with memories of that violent night. This land has ghosts, he whispered, understanding now why the air felt heavy with more than just summer heat. The crash of breaking glass shattered the quiet. Marcus spun toward the sound as Angela screamed from inside. A rock lay among glittering shards on their living room floor. Across its surface, someone had spray-painted a single word in red. Get out. Marcus picked up the rock, its weight familiar in his hand. He'd faced bullets and bombs in war zones, but this was different. This wasn't just a threat to his life, but an attempt to erase history itself, to bury truth under layers of lies and violence. Through the broken window, he could see his neighbors' houses, lights burning behind drawn curtains. How many knew the truth about this land? How many had helped maintain the silence for generations? Angela appeared beside him. Naomi clutched close. What are we going to do? Marcus turned the rock over in his hands, the spray paint still wet enough to stain his fingers red. In the distance, a police siren wailed, but he knew they wouldn't come. Not to help anyway. They were part of a system designed to keep certain stories buried, certain people in their place. The next morning's sun revealed an ugly surprise. Thick black letters marred the white garage door. Go home, outsider. The paint was still tacky, done sometime before dawn. Marcus stood in his driveway, fists clenched, studying each hateful letter. Naomi pressed against Angela's side, her small fingers gripping her mother's shirt. Why do they keep doing this, Mom? Before Angela could answer, police sirens wailed. 2 cruisers pulled up, Officers Hollis and Carter stepping out with smug grins. They made a show of examining the garage door, exchanging knowing looks. Probably did it himself, Hollis announced loudly. These types always want to play victim. Carter snickered. Yeah, spray painting your own house for sympathy? Pretty desperate. Marcus kept his voice steady, though anger burned in his chest. You going to take a report, or just stand there making accusations? Report? Hollis pulled out his notepad with exaggerated slowness. Sure thing. Let's see. Suspect description matches homeowner. Approximately 6 feet tall, heavy-set black male. That's enough. Angela stepped forward, shielding Naomi. Our daughter has to see this hatred every day. You're supposed to protect and serve. Carter's grin widened. Serve? Oh, we're serving something, all right. Serving notice that you folks might want to consider moving somewhere more appropriate. Marcus felt his military training kick in. The calm focus before combat. You threatening my family, officer? Threatening? Hollis raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. Just offering friendly advice. Shame if something happened to that pretty little girl of yours at school. Kids can be so cruel. Angela pulled Naomi closer, her face pale with fury. Get off our property. Public sidewalk, ma'am. Carter tapped his badge. We go where we want. They lingered another 15 minutes, making notes and laughing, before finally driving away. Marcus immediately pulled out his phone to document everything, including their badge numbers. I need to get Naomi to school, Angela said quietly. Then I have to teach. Marcus nodded, but worry gnawed at him. Their daughter hadn't said a word since the officers arrived. His concern proved justified. 3 hours later, his phone rang. Angela calling from the school. You need to come, she said, her voice tight with tears. Now. He found them in the guidance counselor's office. Naomi sat curled in a chair, tears streaming down her face. A crude drawing had been taped to her locker, stick figures of her family being hung from a tree. The other kids, she hiccuped between sobs, they said we deserve it, that we're dirty and don't belong here. Marcus knelt before his daughter, gathering her small hands in his. Listen to me, baby. You are beautiful. You are strong. You belong anywhere you want to be. But why do they hate us? Naomi's voice cracked. We didn't do anything wrong. Angela started to respond, but her phone buzzed. She stepped into the hallway to answer it. When she returned, her face was ashen. That was the principal, she said flatly. My contract is being terminated, effective immediately. What? Marcus stood. They can't do that. Apparently, they've received numerous parental complaints about my aggressive attitude and inappropriate political views in the classroom. Angela's laugh was bitter. Translation, I wouldn't stay quiet while they tormented our daughter. Naomi's sobs grew louder. Marcus pulled both his wife and daughter into his arms, feeling them shake with grief and rage. Other teachers passed by the office window, averting their eyes. Later that night, after finally getting Naomi to sleep, Marcus and Angela sat at their kitchen table. The garage door slur was still visible through the window, a dark reminder of their new reality. We could leave, Angela whispered, staring into her cold coffee. Find somewhere else. Marcus reached across the table, taking her hand. You know what happens if we run? They win. Not just against us, but against history itself. They get to keep burying their crimes. But our daughter is watching us. Marcus's voice grew fierce. She needs to see us stand up, fight back. Show her that justice is worth fighting for. Angela studied their joined hands. I'm scared, Marcus. Not of them, but of losing you. These people, they have power, connections. They could destroy everything we've built. Marcus stood, pulling Angela into his arms. Through the window, he could see police cars creeping past their house again, a constant reminder of the forces aligned against them. Let me tell you something about power, he said softly. Real power isn't about badges or money or who your grandfather was. Real power is standing your ground when everything tells you to run. Real power is fighting for what's right, even when it costs you everything. Angela pressed her face into his chest. They're trying to break us. Then they picked the wrong family. Marcus's voice hardened with determination. You think I survived Delta Force training, fought in 3 war zones, just to let some racist cops and corrupt politicians drive us from our home? They want to erase history? We'll shine a light so bright they can't hide anymore. Angela pulled back, searching his face. What are you going to do? Marcus's jaw set in a hard line. They want a war? He looked at the garage door, the broken window, thought of Naomi's tears and Angela's lost job. They picked the wrong man. Marcus sat in his darkened home office, surrounded by screens showing camera feeds from around the house. He'd installed them strategically. Doorbell camera, garage angles, hidden units in trees. Every approach was covered. The footage played in real time, casting a blue glow across his face as he logged the patrol patterns. "Third pass tonight," he muttered, noting the timestamp as another cruiser rolled by. Their headlights swept across his walls before fading into darkness. His phone buzzed. Jorge calling. "Got those records you asked for," Jorge said without greeting. "You're not going to like what I found." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "Hit me." Pulled land deeds going back 50 years. That whole neighborhood used to be owned by black families. Church, too. After the '64 massacre, properties started changing hands for almost nothing. 10, 20 cents on the dollar. Forced sales? More like fabricated sales. Found cases where owners signed over deeds while they were verifiably dead or in jail. Police reports from the time show a pattern: harassment, arrests on bogus charges, mysterious fires. Sound familiar? Marcus watched another patrol car creep past. History repeating itself. "Gets worse," Jorge continued. "Trace the money. Shell companies bought up everything, then sat on it for decades. Now they're flipping to developers for millions. Guess who owns shares in those companies? City officials? Bingo. Police pension fund, too. Half the department's retirement depends on that land staying quiet. And white." Marcus rubbed his temples. "That's why they're so desperate to push us out. We're not just neighbors they don't want. We're threats to their retirement. Your house, specifically," Jorge added. "It sits on what used to be the church property. If anyone starts digging into that history, their whole scheme falls apart." Marcus pulled up the property records on his computer. "Send me everything you found. I need proof. Already encrypted and headed your way." "But Marcus," Jorge paused. "These people killed to keep this quiet before. They'll do it again." "I know. That's why I'm gathering evidence." Marcus clicked through his camera feeds. Been tracking their movements, photographing every interaction. Building a case they can't bury. Smart. But be careful who you trust. That politician you mentioned? Found his name on some interesting documents. Marcus leaned forward. "Which ones? Development permits? Rezoning applications? He's been fast-tracking everything, overriding historical preservation laws. Gets a nice consulting fee for his trouble." A movement on one of the screens caught Marcus's attention. A patrol car parked down the block, lights off. Officer Carter stepped out, checking his phone. "Got to go," Marcus said. "Carter's up to something." He ended the call and grabbed his gear. Small camera, night vision monocular, radio scanner. Years of military surveillance had taught him how to move unseen, how to track targets without being spotted. Carter walked to Joe's Diner 2 blocks away. Marcus followed, staying in shadows, using parked cars for cover. Through the diner's windows, he saw Carter slide into a booth across from a well-dressed man, City Councilman Davidson. Marcus positioned himself near a partially open window, setting up his camera. The diner was mostly empty, their voices carrying clearly. "This is taking too long," Davidson said, stirring his coffee. "The developers are getting nervous." Carter leaned forward. "We're applying pressure. His wife lost her job. Kids being isolated at school. Standard procedure. Not good enough. That land needs to be clear by end of quarter. The longer he stays, the more chance someone starts asking questions about the original owners." "What about an accident?" Carter suggested. "House fire, maybe? Insurance would pay him off. Everyone wins." Davidson shook his head. "Too risky. He's not some random family. Ex-military, connections. We need him to leave voluntarily." "Then let us handle it our way," Carter insisted. "We'll push him out, just like the others." Marcus's hands tightened on the camera. He'd suspected corruption, but hearing it so casually discussed made his blood boil. These men saw his family as an inconvenience, his home as an obstacle to their profits. He photographed their meeting, recorded their conversation. Every piece of evidence strengthened the case he was building, but it also confirmed what he'd feared. This wasn't random harassment. It was a coordinated campaign, backed by people with power and resources. As Carter and Davidson finished their meeting, Marcus slipped away, moving through back alleys until he reached home. He uploaded the new evidence to his secure server, then sent copies to Jorge. Checking his cameras again, Marcus watched more patrol cars circle his block. They thought they were hunting him, wearing him down. But he was the one gathering intelligence, documenting their moves, building a case that would expose decades of corruption. Let them watch, he thought. Let them think they had the upper hand. He'd learned in Delta Force that the best way to defeat a powerful enemy was to let them underestimate you while you studied their weaknesses. A message from Jorge popped up. Got the files. This is big, Marcus. Could take down half the city government. Good, Marcus typed back. Keep digging. I want every connection, every dirty deal. He looked at the photo of his family on his desk. Angela's proud smile, Naomi's innocent joy. They deserve to live without fear, to build a future without shadows of the past threatening to swallow them. Another patrol car rolled by, slower this time. Marcus didn't flinch from the spotlight that swept across his window. Let them come, he thought. Let them scheme and threaten. He had truth on his side, and he knew from experience. Truth was the deadliest weapon against corrupt power. Marcus pulled into his driveway well past midnight, muscles aching from hours of surveillance. The house was dark except for the kitchen light. Angela always left it on when he worked late. He killed the engine, savoring the quiet moment before heading inside to his family. Movement caught his eye, shadows shifting between parked cars. His combat instincts screamed danger. Before he could react, dark figures emerged from all sides. 5 men in black masks, tactical gear. Not random thugs. Their movement showed training. Should have taken the hint, Reed, one growled, voice muffled behind his mask. Marcus stayed in the car, mind racing through options. They'd positioned themselves to cut off escape routes. 2 carried pistols, 3 had batons. Their stance suggested police or military background. Last chance to walk away, Marcus warned, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. They responded by advancing. Marcus exploded into action. He threw the car door open with crushing force, catching the nearest attacker in the face. Bone cracked under the impact. The man dropped, mask bloody. Marcus rolled out low, dodging a baton swing. His elbow drove up into the second attacker's ribs. The man wheezed, doubling over. Marcus grabbed his wrist, twisted until tendons popped. The baton clattered to the pavement along with a howl of pain. Gunfire cracked the night. Marcus dove behind his car as bullets punched through metal. Glass shattered, raining across the driveway. He heard Angela scream from inside the house. "Stay back!" he shouted toward the door. The last thing he needed was his family in the crossfire. 2 attackers circled left while another went right, trying to flank him. Marcus' army crawled to the rear tire, retrieved the pistol magnetized under his car. The familiar weight steadied his hands. More shots rang out, closer now. Marcus waited for the pattern he'd learned in combat. Most shooters fired in predictable bursts. The split-second pause after 3 rounds was his opening. He pivoted around the trunk, squeezing off 2 precise shots. The first struck a knee, dropping 1 gunman. The second hit center mass, throwing another backward into the bushes. The remaining attacker fired wildly, shattering the car windows above Marcus's head. He rolled under the spray of bullets, came up inside the man's guard. His fist crushed the attacker's throat. As the man gagged and stumbled, Marcus stripped the gun from his grasp. Tires screeched at the end of the block. A getaway vehicle. The two injured attackers scrambled toward it, dragging their unconscious partner. Marcus raised both pistols, aiming not at the men, but at their escape route. 4 rapid shots punctured the vehicle's tires. The van slewed sideways, scraping against parked cars before grinding to a halt. The driver gunned the engine, but the rims only sparked against asphalt. "Marcus!" Angela's voice cracked with fear. She stood in the doorway, Naomi crying behind her. "Get back inside," he ordered, keeping his weapons trained on the disabled van. But the fight was over. The attackers piled into another vehicle that roared up, leaving their first van abandoned. Marcus maintained his combat stance until the sound of engines faded. Only then did he lower his guns, chest heaving. Blood trickled from cuts on his face and arms. His knuckles were raw, body aching from impacts he'd barely registered during the fight. Angela ran to him, her hands trembling as she touched his wounds. "Oh, God, Marcus! What's happening to us?" He pulled her close, feeling her heart race against his chest. Over her shoulder, he saw Naomi watching from the doorway, eyes wide with fear no child should know. "They're not done," he whispered, holding his wife tighter. Red and blue lights began pulsing in the distance. Neighbors had called the police. But Marcus knew they'd find nothing useful. The attackers had been too professional, too well equipped. This wasn't random violence. It was a message. He guided Angela toward the house, where Naomi rushed into their arms. The girl buried her face against him, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Marcus stroked her hair, rage building in his chest. They'd brought violence to his home, terrorized his family. That wasn't something he could forgive. "Inside," he said softly. "We need to clean up before the police arrive." Angela nodded, understanding. They couldn't trust the authorities, not when the attackers moved like law enforcement. She led Naomi to the kitchen, while Marcus quickly gathered shell casings and other evidence. He'd analyze them later, add them to his growing case file. Sirens grew louder as he did a final sweep of the driveway. His military training cataloged details automatically. Impact patterns, blood spots, bullet trajectories. Every piece told a story, and he'd use that story to identify his attackers. Glass crunched under his boots as he walked to the porch. The house he'd bought for his family's security now bore the scars of violence. Broken windows, bullet holes, blood stains. But the walls still stood. They hadn't driven him out. Marcus touched the deed in his pocket. The paper that proved this land was his. The document that threatened decades of corruption. They wanted him gone because he represented something bigger than one family. He represented truth buried in blood-soaked soil, justice delayed, but not forgotten. The first police cruiser rounded the corner. Marcus straightened his shoulders, mind already formulating the careful statement he'd give. He couldn't show how much he really knew, how much evidence he'd gathered. Let them think this was just another random attack. Behind him, Angela called his name softly. He turned to see his wife and daughter framed in the doorway, their faces showing equal measures of fear and determination. This was what he was fighting for. Not just a house, but their right to live without fear, to stand their ground against those who would erase them. The shaky cell phone footage filled the screen. Masked men attacking Marcus in his driveway, the brutal efficiency of his defense, the spray of gunfire. Clarissa James sat back in her office chair, a satisfied smile playing across her lips as she watched the video spread across social media. 3 million views in 2 hours, she told Marcus over the phone. The independent media is having a field day with this. Those thugs didn't know you had security cameras installed. How bad is the backlash? Marcus asked, pacing in his living room. Against you? Minimal. The footage is clear. You defended yourself against armed attackers. But the police department? They're drowning. People are asking why trained men in tactical gear were trying to kill a homeowner. Outside the Reed house, news vans lined the street. Reporters clutched microphones, hoping for a statement. Marcus watched them through the window blinds, remembering similar media circuses from his military days. The online comments are overwhelmingly supportive, Clarissa continued. People are connecting the dots. Your initial arrest, Angela losing her job. Now this attack. It's painting a picture of systematic harassment. Angela joined Marcus at the window, wrapping her arms around his waist. Channel 7 wants an interview, she said. So does the Tribune. Marcus shook his head. Not yet. Let the footage speak for itself. The story exploded throughout the day. Social media filled with clips of the attack, analysts breaking down Marcus's combat techniques, conspiracy theorists connecting it to historical land grabs. By evening, protesters gathered outside City Hall, carrying signs reading, "Justice for the Reeds" and "Stop Police Terror." Mrs. Jenkins arrived as the sun set, clutching a worn leather photo album. Her hands trembled as she sat at the Reeds' kitchen table. "I've held on to these for decades," she said, carefully opening the album. "Wasn't sure I'd ever have cause to share them." The photos were old, edges yellowed with age. They showed a proud brick church surrounded by a black community. Children playing, Sunday services, family gatherings. Then came darker images, the church in flames, men in white hoods watching it burn, bodies in the street. "My daddy took these," Mrs. Jenkins explained, voice thick with emotion. "He knew someday we'd need proof. The newspapers never reported it. Police claimed the church burned itself down. Seen teen people died that night." Angela covered her mouth, tears welling in her eyes. "This happened here? On this land?" Mrs. Jenkins nodded. "Right where your house stands. They buried the truth, along with our people. Sold the land to developers once enough time passed. But some of us remembered." Marcus studied the photos intently, his jaw tight. "Clarissa needs to see these." "Already called her," Mrs. Jenkins said. "She's bringing a photographer to document everything. The press is hungry for this story now, all those years of corruption coming to light." As if on cue, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from Clarissa. Major news networks picking up the story. City officials refusing to comment. Police chief calling emergency meeting. Outside, the crowd of protesters had grown. Their chants echoed through the neighborhood. No more cover-ups, no more fear. Angela watched from the kitchen window as more people arrived, many carrying candles. "The whole city's watching now," she said softly. "They can't keep pretending this isn't happening." Mrs. Jenkins patted her hand. "Sometimes the truth needs a little help breaking free. Your husband's fight brought it all to the surface." Marcus's phone kept buzzing. Journalists, activists, even politicians seeking comments. He ignored them all, focused on the historical photos. Each image was a piece of evidence, a brick in the wall of truth they were building. "The land records Jorge found," he said suddenly. "They'll match the dates on these photos. We can prove the city seized this property illegally after the massacre." Clarissa arrived an hour later, a professional photographer in tow. She moved like a whirlwind, documenting everything, cross-referencing dates and names. Her eyes gleamed with the thrill of the hunt. "This is it," she declared. "The smoking gun. We can prove decades of institutional corruption, all leading to the attacks on your family. The city's house of cards is about to collapse." Through the window, they could see news helicopters circling overhead. The protest had swelled to fill the street. People of all races stood together, demanding answers, demanding justice. Angela hugged Marcus from behind, resting her head against his broad back. "Maybe we can win this," she whispered. "Maybe all this pain means something." He covered her hands with his, drawing strength from her touch. The weight of history pressed down on them, not just their own struggle, but the forgotten victims whose stories were finally emerging. Mrs. Jenkins smiled at them from across the table, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Outside, a black sedan sat parked across the street, its windows tinted dark. Inside, a figure watched the scene unfold through binoculars, taking note of every person who entered or left the Reed house. But for now, the Reeds remained focused on their growing support, on the possibility that truth might finally prevail. The photos spread across the kitchen table told a story of violence and erasure, but also of resilience. Like the church that once stood on this land, the Reeds refused to be burned out, refused to be forgotten. Their stand had become something larger than themselves, a reckoning long overdue. Marcus's truck rolled to a stop in front of his house, the engine ticking in the evening quiet. The meeting with Clarissa had run long, endless planning, strategizing how to use Mrs. Jenkins's photos for maximum impact. His muscles ached from sitting hunched over documents for hours. Something felt wrong the moment he stepped out. The porch light was off, though Angela always left it on for him. As he approached, his combat-trained eyes caught details that made his heart race. Scuff marks on the welcome mat, the front door slightly open. Marcus drew his concealed pistol, years of Delta Force training taking over. He moved silently up the steps, avoiding the spots that creaked. Through the gap in the door, he heard Naomi's muffled sobs. "Naomi?" he called out, pushing the door open with his shoulder, weapon ready. The living room was a mess, the coffee table overturned. Angela's favorite lamp shattered on the floor. Naomi sat curled in the corner of the couch, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy!" She launched herself at him. Marcus caught her with one arm, still scanning the room for threats. "Where's your mother?" His voice was steady, but fear clawed at his chest. "They took her." Naomi buried her face in his shirt. "3 men in masks. Mom fought them, but they hurt her and dragged her out the back door. I hid under my bed like you taught me." Marcus held her tighter, rage building in his chest. "Did they see you?" Naomi shook her head. "I stayed quiet, just like in our drills. But I heard Mom screaming, and then a car drove away fast." He led Naomi to the kitchen, keeping her close as he checked each room. No signs of the intruders remaining, but evidence of the struggle was everywhere. Knocked over chairs, a broken glass, Angela's phone lying cracked on the floor. "Good girl," he murmured, smoothing Naomi's hair. "You did exactly right. I'm going to call for help." A harsh electronic chirping cut through the air. Both jumped. On the kitchen counter sat a cheap burner phone that hadn't been there before. Marcus picked it up carefully, putting it on speaker. "Hello, Reed." Sergeant Hollis's voice dripped with smug satisfaction. "Missing something?" Marcus's hand tightened on the phone. "If you've hurt her, she's alive. For now." Background noise suggested Hollis was in a moving vehicle. "Whether she stays that way depends on you. Back off. Drop the investigation. Tell your lawyer friend to bury those photos. Let me talk to her." A pause, then Angela's voice, strained but defiant. "Marcus, don't you dare!" Her words cut off in a pained gasp. "That's enough, family reunion," Hollis said. "You have 1 hour to make a public statement, withdrawing all allegations. Say you faked the assault footage. Admit you're squatting on private property. And if I don't, your wife disappears. Maybe we find her body in a few weeks, maybe never. Either way, you'll live knowing her death is on your hands." Marcus's voice went deadly quiet. "You're making a mistake, Hollis." "No, you made the mistake thinking you could win this fight. 1 hour, Reed. The clock's ticking. The line went dead. Marcus set the phone down carefully, his hands trembling with controlled fury. Naomi pressed against him, sniffling. Are they going to kill Mom? Marcus knelt, taking her small hands in his. No, baby, I'm going to find her. But I need you to be brave a little longer. Can you do that? She nodded, trying to put on a strong face just like her father. What are you going to do? First, I'm calling Jorge. You'll stay with his family. They have the best security system in town. He was already dialing. Then I'm going hunting. While waiting for Jorge, Marcus moved efficiently through the house. He pulled a heavy black duffel from the attic, equipment he'd hoped never to need again. Body armor, night vision goggles, tactical gear from his Delta Force days. Naomi watched from the doorway as he checked weapons and loaded magazines. Are you going to hurt them? Marcus paused, looking at his daughter. She was too young to carry this weight, to understand the violence men like Hollis brought into the world, but she was also too smart for lies. They hurt our family, he said carefully. They took your mother. Sometimes bad people only understand one language. Jorge arrived in 15 minutes, armed and alert. His wife Carmen immediately wrapped Naomi in a hug. My house is a fortress, Jorge assured Marcus. Security cameras, motion sensors, armed response. She'll be safe. I know. Marcus hugged Naomi tight. Be good for Carmen. I'll bring Mom home soon. As Jorge's car pulled away, Marcus returned to his preparations. The rage he'd been controlling crystallized into cold, tactical focus. Hollis and his men thought they were dealing with an ordinary civilian. They had no idea they'd just challenged a Delta Force commander on his own turf. He knelt in the kitchen, holding Angela's broken phone, remembering her smile that morning. The familiar weight of combat gear settled onto his body like a second skin. In his mind, he was already mapping infiltration routes, analyzing enemy positions, preparing for war. They've just signed their death warrant, he whispered to the empty house. The words weren't a threat or a promise. They were simply fact. These men had taken his wife, terrorized his daughter, and now they would learn why Delta Force operators were feared worldwide. The hour Hollis gave him ticked away, but Marcus made no move to comply. Instead, he finished his preparations in methodical silence. They wanted him to bend, to break. Instead, they'd awakened something far more dangerous than they could imagine. Mrs. Jenkins opened her door before Marcus could knock, as if she'd been waiting. Her eyes were sharp with worry in the porch light. I heard what happened, she said, ushering them inside. Naomi, baby, I've got fresh cookies in the kitchen. Marcus watched his daughter trudge toward the warm, cinnamon-scented kitchen. The usual bounce in her step was gone, replaced by the heavy weight of fear. Mrs. Jenkins touched his arm. I've got cameras on every corner of this house, she said quietly. Motion sensors, too. Been adding security since the riots in '92. Nobody's getting near her. Thank you. Marcus's voice was rough. I need to know she's safe while you raise hell? Mrs. Jenkins's eyes flashed. Good. It's about time somebody did. This land's seen too much pain already. In the kitchen, Naomi picked at a chocolate chip cookie, her usual sweet tooth subdued by worry. Marcus knelt beside her chair. Remember what I taught you about staying safe? He asked. Naomi nodded. Stay away from windows. Keep my phone on. Don't answer the door for anyone but you or Jorge. That's my girl. He kissed her forehead. Mrs. Jenkins has my number. Call if you need anything, even just to talk. Will you find Mom tonight? Marcus hesitated. He wouldn't lie to her. I'm going to try, but it might take time to do it right. Just bring her back. Naomi's voice wavered. I don't care how long it takes. Headlights swept across the front windows, Jorge's SUV pulling up. Marcus hugged Naomi one last time, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "Be brave, baby girl." "I love you." "Love you too, Daddy." Mrs. Jenkins walked him to the door. "Those men think they can keep doing this forever," she said. "Show them they're wrong." Marcus nodded grimly. "They won't touch another family after tonight." Outside, Jorge was already unloading gear from his trunk. The ex-Delta operator moved with practiced efficiency, passing Marcus a heavy tactical vest. "Level 4 plates," Jorge said. "Will stop anything short of a rifle round. Got your old kit, too. Night vision, comms, the works." They moved into Mrs. Jenkins's garage, laying equipment on a workbench. Jorge spread out a hand-drawn map. "I've got 3 possible locations where they might be holding Angela," he said, tapping points with a calloused finger. "Old warehouse complex by the river. Lots of abandoned buildings, perfect for keeping someone quiet. Police training facility on the outskirts, restricted access, but they've got holding cells, and this condemned church property they use for SWAT drills." Marcus studied the map, mind working through tactical approaches. "What's your intel source?" "Remember Bobby from the unit? He's private security now. Does contract work with the department. Says there's been unusual activity at all 3 sites tonight. Patrol cars coming and going, lights on when buildings should be empty." Jorge laid out more gear: suppressed pistols, extra magazines, combat knives, zip ties. Everything they'd need for a quiet infiltration. But his movements were tense, worried. "Marcus." Jorge paused, hand on a rifle case. "These aren't insurgents in some mountain cave. They're cops. Maybe dirty ones, but still cops. You go in hot, there's no coming back. Best case, you spend life in prison. Worst case, they killed my career once," Marcus said, checking the action on a pistol. "Tried to destroy my family. Now they've taken my wife. What would you do?" Jorge was quiet for a long moment. "Same thing. But you need to understand. You go in there, you might not come back." Marcus loaded a magazine, the clicks sharp in the garage's silence. "I don't need to. Angela does. At least let me come with you. 2-man team, just like the old days." "No." Marcus was firm. "I need you here, watching Naomi. If something goes wrong—" He didn't finish the thought. Jorge nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm running Overwatch from here. Radio contact the whole time. You need backup? I'm 15 minutes out." They spent the next hour going over equipment and plans. Marcus stripped down his tactical vest, keeping only essential gear. Speed and stealth would be critical. Jorge helped him adjust the night vision mount, check radio frequencies, tape down anything that might rattle. "Bobby said the warehouse complex has the most activity," Jorge reported, studying his phone. 3 unmarked cars arrived in the last hour. Could be our best bet. Marcus agreed. The location made sense. Isolated, multiple escape routes, easy to control access. He'd start there, then move to the other sites if needed. "What's your timeline?" Jorge asked. "I'll recon the warehouse first. Look for signs of Angela. If she's there, I'll wait until their guard drops, probably early morning. Hit them when they're tired. Sluggish." Jorge handed him a burner phone. "Encrypted. Use it if you need to call in cavalry. I've got some old unit contacts on standby, guys who owe us favors." Marcus tucked the phone away, then began his final equipment check. The familiar routine centered him, pushing away emotion in favor of cold precision. Pistol cleaned and loaded, spare magazines secured, knife edge honed to razor sharpness. Each piece of gear tested and positioned for silent, efficient access. Jorge watched him work, recognition in his eyes. This wasn't Marcus, the family man, anymore. This was Commander Reed, the officer who'd led them through 100 dangerous missions. "Remember your training," Jorge said quietly. "Mind like water. Let it flow around obstacles." "I remember." Marcus slid the knife into his boot sheath. "Keep my daughter safe. With my life." Jorge clasped his shoulder. "Good hunting, brother." Marcus stepped out into the darkness, feeling the night air against his face. Somewhere out there, Angela was waiting, and the men who took her were about to learn why Delta Force operators were considered among the deadliest warriors on Earth. The warehouse loomed against the night sky, a hulking mass of corroded metal and broken windows. Marcus crouched in the shadows of a defunct loading dock, studying the building through his night vision goggles. 2 guards patrolled the perimeter, sloppy, predictable routes that spoke of overconfidence. They weren't military, just cops playing soldier. He'd been watching for 3 hours now, mapping their patterns. The East Guard smoked every 40 minutes, always in the same spot behind a dumpster. The West Guard was lazy, cutting corners off his route to check his phone. Inside, lights showed movement on the 2nd floor. At least 4 more hostiles, probably more. Jorge's voice crackled in his earpiece. "Security cameras on the north and west corners. Looking for blind spots." "Copy." Marcus kept his voice barely above a whisper. "Any sign of Angela?" "Movement in a 2nd-floor office. Someone tied to a chair. Can't confirm identity from this angle." Marcus's jaw tightened. The thought of Angela bound, afraid, made his hands itch for violence, but he forced the emotion down, letting tactical training take over. Emotion got you killed. Precision kept you alive. The East Guard wandered toward his smoking spot, right on schedule. Marcus moved, a shadow among shadows, years of infiltration experience guiding each silent step. The guard lit his cigarette, exhaling smoke into the cool night air. He never heard Marcus approach. The garrote wire slipped around the guard's throat with practiced ease. Marcus yanked back hard, cutting off both airway and blood flow. The guard tried to struggle, but Marcus had him locked in position, arms pinned. 15 seconds later, the body went limp. Marcus lowered the guard quietly, zip-tied his hands and feet, and secured the weapon. 1 down. He keyed his radio twice, the signal for Jorge to loop the security camera feed. "You're clear for 2 minutes," Jorge confirmed. "West Guard approaching your position." Marcus melted back into darkness, circling behind storage containers. The 2nd Guard rounded the corner, eyes fixed on his phone's glowing screen. Amateur. Marcus let him pass, then struck. Piano wire whispered from its hiding place in his sleeve. One smooth motion, and it was around the guard's neck. This one fought harder, trying to slam Marcus against the wall. But Marcus had leverage and experience. He rode the guard's momentum, maintaining the chokehold until unconsciousness claimed another victim. "Guards neutralized," Marcus whispered into his radio. Moving to infiltration point. A rusted fire escape offered access to the 2nd floor. Marcus tested each rung carefully, distributing his weight to prevent metal fatigue sounds. The window at the top was already broken. No need to risk noise cutting glass. Inside, the warehouse air was thick with dust and decay. Marcus moved like a ghost across rotting floorboards, years of training guiding his feet to avoid creaks and groans. Voices drifted from down the hall. 2 men complaining about the late shift. A television droned somewhere. 3 hostiles in the break room, Jorge reported. 1 more roaming the halls. Target still confirmed in North Office. Marcus drew his suppressed pistol, holding it ready as he advanced. The roaming guard appeared at the end of the hall, yawning. 1 gentle squeeze of the trigger, and a subsonic round took him in the thigh. Before he could cry out, Marcus closed the distance and drove a knee into his solar plexus. A sharp strike to the base of the skull, and another hostile was unconscious. The office door was ahead. Light spilled from beneath it, along with the sound of someone pacing. Marcus pressed his ear to the wood, listening intently. 1 set of footsteps, occasional muttering. Single hostile. He was reaching for the handle when Jorge's urgent whisper came through. Movement from the break room. One hostile headed your way. Marcus melted into an alcove just as heavy boots approached. The guard passed within inches, keys jingling at his belt. He reached for the office door. Time slowed. Marcus could take him now, but the noise might alert the others. Wait too long, and he'd enter the office, possibly threatening Angela. Decision points compressed into microseconds. The guard opened the door. Marcus's heart clenched at what he saw inside. Angela sat tied to a chair, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with defiance. She was alive. She was whole. Relief warred with rage at the sight of her injuries. The guard stepped into the room, raising his gun. Time for another chat, Mrs. Reed. Marcus tensed, ready to strike. But he had to time this perfectly. One wrong move, and Angela would be at risk. His muscles coiled like springs as he prepared to burst into action. He knew what would come next. Disarm, disable, secure. Just like 100 other missions. But this one was different. This one was personal. Every fiber of his being focused on the next crucial moments that would determine his wife's fate. The guard took another step toward Angela, weapon trained on her head. Marcus could see the tremor in the man's hand. Another amateur trying to play tough. That weakness would be his undoing. Angela's eyes suddenly widened, looking past the guard toward the doorway. She'd seen Marcus's shadow. The guard started to turn, his gun beginning to shift targets. Marco's grip tightened on his weapon. The next few seconds would determine everything. Marcus exploded into motion. The guard barely had time to register the shadow behind him before Marcus's hand clamped down on his gun arm. In one savage twist, bone cracked like dry wood. The guard's scream was cut short by Marcus's elbow, smashing into his temple. The gun clattered to the floor as the guard crumpled. But the brief noise was enough. Shouts erupted from down the hall, followed by the piercing wail of an alarm. Multiple hostiles incoming, Jorge warned through the radio. At least 15 heat signatures converging on your position. Marcus yanked a knife from his boot and sliced through Angela's restraints. Can you walk? I can run, she said, rubbing her wrists. Her split lip curved into a fierce smile. Make them pay. Heavy boots thundered up the stairs. Marcus kicked over a metal desk for cover, pulling Angela behind it, just as the first shots punched through the doorway. He counted the muzzle flashes, 4 shooters in the hall, more coming up behind them. Stay low, he ordered, then popped up to return fire. His first shot caught an officer in the shoulder, spinning him into his companions. The second round shattered a fire extinguisher on the wall, filling the corridor with obscuring white powder. Carter's voice rose above the chaos. Push forward! Don't let them escape! Marcus reached into his tactical vest and pulled out a flashbang grenade. Cover your ears, he told Angela. The device bounced into the hallway, followed by screams of "Grenade!" Then thunder and lightning filled the world. Disoriented officers stumbled in the smoke and powder. Marcus moved through them like a ghost, each shot precise and brutal. One took a round through the knee. Another caught an elbow to the throat. Carter appeared through the haze, firing wildly. Marcus's return shot caught him in the thigh, dropping him with a howl of pain. This way! Marcus grabbed Angela's hand, leading her toward the emergency stairs. But more cops were flooding up from below, filling the stairwell with gunfire. Back! They retreated into the office as bullets chewed the doorframe. Marcus spotted Briggs among the attackers, face pale with terror. Their eyes met. Briggs turned and ran, shoving past his fellow officers in his desperation to escape. Coward! Someone shouted after him. But Marcus was already moving, using the chaos to his advantage. He pulled a smoke grenade from his vest and rolled it down the stairs. Dense gray clouds billowed up, providing cover. "Fire in the hole!" An officer's warning came too late. Marcus had already pulled the pin on another flashbang, this one modified with extra powder. The explosion was deafening in the enclosed space, sending officers tumbling down the stairs in a tangle of limbs and curses. Angela pointed to a maintenance catwalk spanning the warehouse floor. "There! It leads to the central office." They sprinted across the metal grating as bullets sparked off the railings. Marcus paused to shoot out the catwalk's support cables behind them, sending a section crashing down with several pursuing officers still on it. More gunfire erupted from below. Marcus shoved Angela behind a support beam, returning fire one-handed while retrieving his last flashbang. He'd modified this one specially, wrapping the shell in duct tape and fishing line. As shots peppered their position, he tied the grenade to a fallen piece of catwalk. "When I say now, run for that office," he told Angela. She nodded, eyes hard with determination. Marcus swung the makeshift pendulum, letting it build momentum. When the line of officers below grouped up for a push, he released it. The flashbang arced through the air, detonating at head height in a thunderous explosion that sent them scattering. "Now!" They sprinted the final stretch as chaos erupted below. Someone had knocked over a barrel of industrial solvent, spreading flames across the warehouse floor. Smoke began to fill the building as ammunition cooked off in the heat. They reached the central office door, heavy oak with reinforced hinges. Inside, they could hear Hollis's voice. "Burn the files! All of it." Marcus checked his magazine. 3 rounds left. He could hear sirens in the distance. Real police would be arriving soon. But Hollis was inside with evidence that could expose decades of corruption. They couldn't let him destroy it. The door was likely rigged or guarded. A frontal assault would be suicide. But Marcus spotted an air vent above the frame, large enough to drop a flashbang through. If they timed it right. Angela seemed to read his mind. She pulled a small mirror from her pocket, the kind women keep in purses, and slid it under the door crack. Marcus peered at the reflection. Hollis stood by a desk, pressing a gun to a briefcase while feeding documents into a shredder. 2 other men worked frantically to burn files in a metal trash can. The evidence was disappearing by the second. They had to move now. Marcus retrieved his final flashbang, calculating angles in his head. The vent would provide the perfect entry point, but timing would be crucial. One mistake, and Hollis might shoot the briefcase, destroying their best chance at justice. Somewhere in the burning warehouse below, Carter was still screaming in pain. The sprinkler system activated, sending water cascading through the smoke. Steam began to fill the upper level as Marcus prepared for the final breach. He met Angela's eyes, saw the same determination there that burned in his own heart. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Marcus raised the flashbang, ready to end this fight once and for all. Marcus braced himself, then kicked the vent cover loose. The flashbang dropped through, but before it could detonate, Hollis's mocking voice rang out. "I know you're out there, Reed. Come face what's coming to you like a man." Marcus hesitated, finger on the trigger mechanism. Angela touched his arm and shook her head. Hollis would be expecting the flashbang now. "Your wife wants to see you," Hollis called. "Don't keep her waiting." Marcus's jaw clenched. He'd have to change tactics. Keeping his voice steady, he responded, "Open the door, Hollis. Let's talk." "That's more like it." Keys jingled, and the heavy door swung open. The scene inside made Marcus's blood boil. Angela sat bound to a chair, her face bruised but her eyes blazing with defiance. Hollis stood behind her, pressing a gun to her head. Councilman Grayson worked frantically at a paper shredder while another officer fed documents into a burning trash can. "You think you're a hero?" Hollis sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. You're just another dead black man. Drop your weapon." Marcus slowly placed his gun on the floor, his other hand sliding behind his back where his phone was already streaming. Jorge had set up the connection. Everything happening now was broadcasting live to thousands of viewers. The mighty Delta Force commander, Hollis continued, reduced to breaking into private property. What would your military buddies think? They'd wonder why a police sergeant is helping cover up a massacre, Marcus replied, his voice carrying clearly for the stream. How many families did you drive out, Hollis? How many homes did you steal? Shut up! Hollis pressed the gun harder against Angela's temple. You don't know anything. I know your grandfather led the mob that burned down that church. I know you and Grayson have been running this scam for years, using cops to terrorize black families, then flipping their properties for profit. Grayson's hands froze over the shredder. Hollis, shut him up! But Marcus kept talking, making sure every word was captured by the stream. The massacre, the land theft, the corruption. It's all documented in that briefcase. That's why you're so desperate to destroy it. I said, shut up! Hollis's face had turned purple with rage. That's when Marcus made his move. The flashbang he'd palmed earlier flew through the air, detonating in a thunderous explosion of light and sound. In the chaos, Marcus surged forward. His first strike knocked the gun from Hollis's stunned grip. The second was a savage elbow that sent the sergeant staggering back. Marcus spun, blocking a wild punch from the other officer and driving his knee into the man's solar plexus. Hollis recovered faster than expected, drawing a hunting knife from his boot. The blade slashed through the air where Marcus's throat had been a second before. They circled each other, two predators locked in a deadly dance. I'm going to gut you like a pig, Hollis snarled, lunging forward. Marcus deflected the thrust, but Hollis's follow-up slash opened a line of fire across his forearm. The sergeant pressed his advantage, driving Marcus back with a flurry of strikes. But Marcus had fought better men in worse places. He caught Hollis's wrist on the next attack, twisting until tendons popped. The knife clattered to the floor. Before Hollis could recover, Marcus's head snapped forward, crushing the sergeant's nose in a spray of blood. Movement caught his eye, Grayson reaching for a pistol on the desk. Marcus snatched up Hollis's dropped knife and threw it in one fluid motion. The blade sank deep into the councilman's shoulder, pinning him to the wall with a scream of pain. Hollis tried to tackle Marcus from behind, but years of hand-to-hand combat had honed the veteran's instincts. He shifted his weight, using Hollis's momentum to slam him face first into the metal filing cabinet. Before the sergeant could recover, Marcus drove his knee into the man's kidney, then wrapped an arm around his throat in a crushing hold. The whole city is watching. Marcus growled in Hollis's ear as the sergeant thrashed helplessly. They're seeing exactly who you are. Blood poured from Hollis's broken nose as he gasped for air. You can't prove. Check his phone, Angela called out, having worked one hand free from her restraints. He's streaming everything. Hollis's eyes widened with sudden understanding. His struggles became desperate, but Marcus's grip was unbreakable. The sergeant's face turned purple, then began to go slack as unconsciousness took him. Marcus released the hold, letting Hollis crumple to the floor. He retrieved his gun and trained it on Grayson, who still hung pinned to the wall by the knife in his shoulder. The briefcase, Marcus ordered. Slide it over. You're making a mistake, Grayson wheezed. We can make a deal. The sound of splintering wood cut him off as federal agents crashed through the door, weapons raised. FBI. Everybody down! Marcus raised his hands, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. The evidence is in that briefcase, he told the lead agent, and the whole takedown was streamed live. Hollis lay bleeding on the floor, his words slurring as agents cuffed him. You're dead, Reed. You hear me? Dead. But his threats were drowned out by the sound of justice finally arriving. As Angela wrapped her arms around Marcus, he could hear helicopters circling outside, their spotlights illuminating the truth that could no longer be buried. The warehouse had become a war zone of justice served, with Hollis's broken body and Grayson's pathetic whimpers serving as testament to the power of one man's refusal to back down. The evidence was safe, the corruption exposed, and the whole world had watched it happen in real time. Days after the warehouse takedown, Marcus stood with Angela and Naomi in front of their TV, watching the news unfold. The morning light filtered through their newly repaired windows as helicopter footage showed a line of police officers being led out of the precinct in handcuffs. 17 officers arrested in connection with the decades-long corruption scandal, the reporter announced. The camera zoomed in on Hollis's bruised face as federal agents guided him into a waiting vehicle. His nose was still swollen from Marcus's headbutt. "Look at him now," Angela said, her arm around Naomi's shoulders. "Not so tough without his badge and gun." The footage cut to Councilman Grayson's perp walk. His tailored suit couldn't hide the bandage bulging under his shoulder where Marcus's knife had struck. Protesters lined the street, their signs demanding justice and accountability. Some carried enlarged photos of the burned church and its congregation, faces that had been hidden from history for too long. The documents recovered from Councilman Grayson's briefcase detail a systematic campaign of intimidation and property theft dating back to the 1960s massacre, the reporter continued. Federal prosecutors are calling it one of the largest civil rights conspiracies ever uncovered. Clarissa James appeared on screen, surrounded by reporters on the courthouse steps. Her voice rang with triumph. Today proves that justice cannot be buried. Not under threats, not under lies, and not under decades of silence. The truth always finds its way to the light. The camera panned across the crowd. Mrs. Jenkins stood among the protesters, holding a faded photograph of her father in front of the church before it burned. Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, but she stood tall, finally vindicated. "Thanks to the evidence secured by Marcus Reed," Clarissa continued, "we can now prove that city officials and corrupt police actively conspired to drive black families from their homes. They didn't just cover up a massacre. They profited from it for generations." The scene shifted to City Hall, where workers were carefully removing the portrait of a former mayor now implicated in the original cover-up. In its place, they hung a plaque commemorating the victims of the church burning. The site of the 1963 massacre has been designated a historic landmark, the reporter explained. Plans are underway for a memorial garden and community center. The Reed family home, which became ground zero for exposing the conspiracy, will remain as a symbol of resistance against systemic racism. Marcus muted the TV as a knock sounded at their door. Angela opened it to find Jorge grinning on their porch, holding a massive pot of his grandmother's pozole. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, stepping inside. "Abuela insisted on making enough for an army." More neighbors arrived throughout the afternoon. Mrs. Jenkins brought her famous sweet potato pie. The Kim family from down the street carried trays of bulgogi and kimchi. Even some of the white neighbors who had once stared suspiciously now came bearing casseroles and apologies, their living room filled with voices and laughter. Children played in the yard, while adults shared stories on the porch. The atmosphere was different now. No more fearful glances or hushed whispers. This was what community should look like. As the sun began to set, Marcus found himself standing on his front steps, watching the golden light paint the neighborhood in warm hues. Angela leaned against his shoulder, while Naomi sat on the porch rail, swinging her legs. "Look, Daddy," Naomi said, pointing to where more neighbors were walking up their driveway with covered dishes. "They're not scared of us anymore." "They never should have been, baby," Angela replied softly. Fear is what those men used to control people. But that's over now. Marcus watched as black, white, Latino, and Asian families mingled in his yard, sharing food and conversation. Children chased each other across the grass where he had once fought for his life. The place that had been meant to break them had instead become a symbol of healing. Mrs. Jenkins approached, carrying a framed black and white photograph. "I want you to have this," she said, handing it to Marcus. "It's the only picture I have of the church before they burned it." The photo showed a proud brick building with stained glass windows, its steps crowded with Sunday worshippers in their finest clothes. Marcus recognized the determined look in their eyes, the same defiance he'd seen in his own family's faces during their darkest moments. "My daddy used to say that sacred ground never loses its power," Mrs. Jenkins continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Maybe that's why you ended up here. Maybe those old souls knew you'd be the one to finally bring their story to light." Naomi touched the photograph gently. "They can't erase us anymore. Can they, Daddy?" Marcus pulled his daughter close, feeling Angela's arms wrap around them both. The setting sun painted their shadows long across the porch, 3 figures standing tall and unafraid on land that had been reclaimed by truth. "Not ever again, baby," he whispered, his voice carrying the weight of both promise and prayer. "Not ever again." The evening air filled with the sounds of children laughing, plates clinking, and neighbors sharing stories. Where hatred had once tried to divide, love was slowly rebuilding. Where lies had sought to bury history, truth now bloomed like flowers breaking through concrete. The Reeds stood together on their porch, watching their community heal. They had fought for more than just a house. They had fought for home in its deepest sense. A place where all people could stand in dignity, where the past was honored, and where justice finally found its voice. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.